In this video, we're going to be loading the 4570 with 350 grain Berry's bullets from mild to wild. Guy Miner here from UltimateReloader.com. Today's video, we're going to take a hard look at loading the 350 grain Berry's bullets in the 4570. We're going to talk about the bullets themselves, advantages of using them, some considerations that we have to take into when we're using these plated bullets. Also, we're going to talk about our loading setup on this Lyman 8-station turret press. It's a good one. We're going to get into our various loads from trapdoor levels up to some pretty major loads with the 350 grain bullet. And if you don't understand trapdoor yet, you will. We're also going to talk about not only the chronograph results, but the recoil results. And we're going to come to some conclusions. You may have seen some of our other features with Berry's bullets. We've used them in revolvers, we've used them in the 30-30 rifles, we've loaded some at low velocity, 30 calibers, and just quite a few different ones. Berry's interesting company, founded in 1961 by Ray Berry. And I find these things in gun shops. I found them on the East Coast, I found them on the West Coast, I found them in many different places where I was looking for hand loading supplies, and they're available online as well. There are over 60 different types of bullets made by Berry's. They also make a lot of other reloading things, but we're focusing on the bullets for this. Berry's bullets are not a conventional jacketed bullet with a lead core and a jacket that the core is inserted into. Now, these start with a lead core and then they are plated with a copper plating over them, and some of them have thicker plate bullets, and that allows them to withstand a higher velocity. The standard Berry's handgun bullets are typically good for about 1,250 feet per second. Some of them go quite a bit higher. We recently tested some revolver bullets up to about 1,500 feet per second. They did really well. That was a thick plate bullet made for that. The one today is rated for 1,950 feet per second, which is a lot of velocity out of a 4570. They have some advantages. The big advantage to me is that they are considerably less expensive than a jacketed hunting bullet. A lot of my hunting loads for the 4570 are built around Hornady bullets. Good bullets, I've got a mess of them right over here, but those bullets for plinking, it gets expensive. They're about 85 cents a piece, whereas I can pick up these Berry's bullets for about 38 cents a piece, cutting the cost of my loads in half, maybe even lower than half. So that's a nice thing. They have good accuracy, they foul less than some other loads. For instance, the lead bullet loads that are very traditional in the 4570. Many good lead bullet loads do a great job with very little fouling, if any. But some will mess up your barrel, okay? And they'll be leaving some of that lead stuff behind and the residue from the lube behind. And the Berry's, you don't have that. You've got an encapsulated, your lead is encapsulated behind all that thick copper plating, and you don't have that fouling problem. Load data for the Berry's. That question comes up sometimes, and Berry's is real clear about that on their website. You can use any published load data for either lead bullets or jacketed bullets. Now, as a good hand loader, you need to remember, we start low, see what the rifle's doing, take a look at that, and then work our way up. With the 4570, it's very important to understand the capabilities of your rifle, what it can handle. And you might want to think about what your shoulder can handle too, because these things can kick. There's also some considerations in crimping, because it is certainly possible to, if you put a real hard roll crimp in here, it is certainly possible to break through the copper plating, and that will lead to subpar performance. You may have some issues with pieces of bullet plating and things like that, accuracy issues. I don't know. So I make sure that I do not over crimp them, whether you use a taper crimp or a roll crimp. In this case, I used a roll crimp, but I'll show you how we do that. Let's take a look at the bullet itself. 350 grain, which interestingly for a 4570 is on the light side. Yeah, I know. If you're used to loading 7mm, 6.5, 30 caliber, something like that, and you think 350 grains is a light bullet, yeah, it kind of is. On the spectrum of 4570 bullets, the traditional loads have been 405 grain bullets and even 500 grain bullets. So the 4570 goes back a very long way. back to 1873, an honest 150 years ago. I brought my old rifle in here just to kind of give you an idea how far back this stuff goes. Mine is not an 1873 rifle. Mine is a Sharps bore chart, invented in Germany by Borchardt, Hugo Borchardt, and then produced by the Sharps company here in America. Very strong action, single shot. 1878 is when these started being made, and they were only made for a very few years. They came in at kind of the tail end of the single shot era of buffalo guns, and a lot of them were made for hunters, and there were some military contracts as well. I think only about 8,000 of these were made. This one's in pretty good shape. The bore isn't all that great. To take it easy on this old gun, I only load low velocity lead bullets for it. The berries would be a good thing to use, except the bore on my rifle is oversized and the berries are at 0.458 inches. So they're not quite big enough to do well from my rifle. 350 grains, kind of light on the edge, 458 diameter. They are specifically intended, as you can see from the label on the box, for the 4570. They will function in all 4570s that I know of. I've shot them out of both my Marlin and our shop Henry. They do really well. There's no problems with stabilizing. It's actually kind of a short bullet for the 4570, so it stabilizes real nice and easy. The thick plating on that bullet allows a max speed of 1950 feet per second, according to berries. The cannula on that bullet is located in the perfect spot to give you an overall cartridge length that will cycle through your Marlin, your Henry, probably any 4570 lever action that you could come up with. They can be crimped. I recommend crimping on a 4570. And avoid that, like I already mentioned, avoid that too heavy a crimp on them though. So if 350 grains is kind of on the light side for 4570, then why choose it? Well, there's some good reasons. One, it is a little bit lighter and you can shoot it a little faster for a little bit flatter trajectory out to a couple of 100 yards. I like that. I also like the fact that most of the major manufacturers, if they offer a hunting bullet in 4570, it is a 350 grainer, or at least some of them are. Spear makes them. Hornady makes a couple of different 350s. You've got Swift makes their 350 grain A-frame. There's a bunch of really good hunting bullets in 350 grains. So why not have a less expensive practice bullet in 350 grains? Makes sense for me. I can go out and go plinking and target shooting with my 4570 without throwing those expensive big hunting bullets downrange. That's why I like the 350. And they work out really well. I was noticing very smooth feeding, particularly from our Henry rifle when we had it at the range. So the shape is optimized for use in a 4570 lever gun. Advantages of going with the berries bullet, we've talked about before already. It's a less expensive alternative to these hunting bullets. The fouling is reduced over some of the lead bullets that are available. Not all lead bullets. I'm not getting down on lead bullets at all. The lead bullets and the 4570 go together fantastic. This is no slam on lead bullets. This is just a good alternative if you prefer a copper jacketed type bullet, in this case a copper plated type bullet. As you can see, we are all set up for reloading some 4570 ammo. But before we get started on that, before I get into what all we've got here and start showing you how I used it to load my ammo, I want to talk about the 4570 cartridge a little bit and about how to go about reloading this thing and why it's maybe a little more complex than you might think. The cartridge has been around for 150 years, started in 1873. And it was slowly dying out. It was a military cartridge, it was a buffalo gun cartridge, it was a long-range target cartridge, but it was slowly dying out. Why? Well, because we were coming up with things like 30-30, 30-06, 270 Winchester, all great rounds that kind of took its place in many, many ways. So it got superseded by a lot of those and was sort of dying out. And then in the 70s, Marlin took a look at their 336 and said, can we change that thing up a little bit to take the big old 45-70? And they did. Now, that resulted in a much stronger lever action gun, mass-produced, readily available, could take a scope on top. That wasn't the only lever gun. There were others, but let's talk about the Marlin, because I think that what they did is they made it very, very popular. And interest in the 45-70 started swinging back up. Later years, Henry came in with their own version of a lever action 45-70. I suspect it's just as strong as the Marlin, if not stronger, I don't know. And you've seen Marlin has had its ups and downs in recent years. Right now, Ruger owns them, and I think they're probably making a very, very good product. That's everything I've heard about. I haven't got my hands on one yet. Someday I will. So with the 45-70, what you have to be careful of is what level you're loading it to, what pressure level you're loading it to. And the best way to start that is with some load manuals. And I want to explain how I selected my powder charge and to go with this 350 grain Barry's bullet, and how I loaded it through 3 different power levels. And note that there are power levels beyond where I went. Okay, that's good to know about. Lowest level is noted in the manuals as a trapdoor load. A trapdoor, what's that? That's a rifle. That's the Springfield Trapdoor 45-70. And it dates all the way back to 1873 as well. So there's some of those rifles still out there being used 150 years later. You can't be feeding them top end, break your shoulder type loads. That's not good. You're gonna hurt the gun, maybe catastrophically. So you gotta take it easy. That's why there are trapdoor level loads. And don't think of those loads as necessarily wimp loads, because they'll have a 350 or even a 405 grain bullet moving fast enough that you gotta remember, that's what took out the buffalo herds here in North America. A lot of big old 45-70s. And they did a fine job of it. Well, if they can take out a bison, then I think it's probably good enough for white-tailed deer or black bear. All right, more than good enough. So don't think that limiting yourself to trapdoor level loads is necessarily a bad thing. And one thing I will tell you, it is much easier on the shoulder because its top level loads can really kick. So they are limited in pressure, and then the 1895 Marlin type loads have more pressure, and there's some disagreements on how much pressure they can handle. All right, one source says 28,000 CUP, copper units of pressure. Next source, another one, says, oh no, they can handle up to 40,000. Okay, somewhere in there, I go, I can only take so much, all right? And I have my own practical limits. And then there are the loads for the Ruger number 1, an extremely strong falling block rifle. Never, ever, ever use those Ruger number 1 loads in your lever action Marlin or Henry, or in any of the old trapdoor rifles or any of the other old single shot rifles like my Sharps. Just don't do it. They don't need to have that kind of abuse heaped on them. So take a look at the loads, and I found loads at the Lyman book at the trapdoor load level with good old IMR 3031, been around a long time, and I found them also at Lyman's 1895 Marlin loads, and it says 1895, but the thing came out in the 1970s, okay? So they were good. 1895 is a good model number for it. And it's got them at that level, and then I took a look, and Hornady has got the same 350 grain stuff loaded up to an even higher level with 3031. And then we've got Hodgdon that loads them up even hotter. So take a long, hard look and figure out where you want to go. And this is one cartridge I would really seriously encourage you to start low and work up. You find out how your rifle's handling it and how you're handling it. All right, so for the loads that I put together in this project, I started out with Lyman's very low level 4570 trapdoor load, okay? That is 40 grains of IMR 3031, the 350 grain Barry's bullets, and I used just standard CCI primers, large rifle primers. No need whatsoever for a Magnum primer with this powder and this load. That is a pretty nice cartridge. makes an enjoyable one to shoot. And we'll get into the ballistics and the recoil of these things in just a couple minutes. Went on up from there. Instead of 40 grains, we took a big jump and we went up to 40 or 52.5 grains of 30-31 for Lyman's version of the 1895 Marlin load. I found that to be another enjoyable load to shoot, but mostly it was fun because it's kicking a little more, okay? And I gotta admit, one of my attractions to the big bore Marlin is that's a big Hurkin bore, 4.58 diameter, and it's kind of fun to shoot one of these things with some more powerful loads and feel that recoil and know that you're putting down a big chunk of lead at a good velocity downrange. Then the last step we took was up to Hornady level loads, and I went up to 56 grains of IMR 30-31, and that one was, well, in the Henry with the scope we had on it, that was almost too much fun. Okay, so let's get into the actual loading of our 45-70 loads here. One more thing to take a look at, you can see there, these are both Hornady cases, and they are both factory length, and they are two different lengths. That is because Hornady came out with some different bullets not too many years ago that have a pointy tip that's safe to use in a tubular magazine rifle like the Marlin or the Henry. And they needed to shorten the case a little bit for those. I found those cases, the little shorter ones, with the 325 grain FTX that we shot out of the Henry earlier this year. They're good cases, but they are shorter. And I like to keep them separate for separate types of loads, separate types of ammo from the standard 2.1 inch. These are a little shorter, they're 2.040. And so they're a little bit shorter. If you start out with the long ones and you want to use those pointy bullets, you're going to need to shorten them. But we've got another 45-70 article coming out on the Hornady loads. More on that later. This time we're talking about berries. So for our loading project, what I chose was the mild load, the 40 grains of IMR 30-31 and that 350 grain berries, because it's more pleasant to shoot. It's just a nicer plinking round than the other more powerful ones. And we went ahead and taken a look at these brand new Hornady cases, the 2.1 inch ones, and I found very quickly that some of the primer pockets are really tight, making it difficult to seat a primer in them. I happen to kind of like the tight primer pockets. I know that they're going to hold the primers well and they're probably going to last for many, many firings. However, I did go ahead and take the opportunity to ream them out just a little bit for a little easier seating. You don't have to go crazy with that. Just needed to relax that fit a little bit so we can get those primers in nice and easy. That's about all it takes. They're still going to be snug. A little bit of the Imperial sizing die wax, get that on there. And I'm going to go ahead and use my Hornady dies. And what I'm going to do here is go ahead and size that, even though it's a brand new case, and then click over. This is belling or flaring the case mouth just like you do on a big revolver case. By the way, with the Imperial sizing die wax, a little goes a long way. You don't need much on there. Real easy on that. And then flare out the mouth. So in 2 quick steps on here, we are sizing and belling. And the belling is on there to allow the bullet to be seated more easily, particularly important if you're using a soft lead bullet, by the way, so you don't shave lead off the bullet while you're seating it. Okay, there are 5 cases, all sized, lubed, sized, and belled. We're ready to move on in our loading process. I really like hand priming, and I like, in particular, using this Frankfurt Arsenal Perfect hand priming tool. It is great. Very easy to use, very well organized little kit that you get with it. And I've probably loaded I think every cartridge I've loaded in the last 6 months, maybe close to a year, has been with this hand priming tool. So 4570 in there. And there it is. I check, make sure it's flush or below. This is below. 2 checks, one with my fingertip. I'm just running it across there, and then the other, I'll set it right down on a nice flat surface like this, and if it wobbles around, I know I didn't seat it deep enough. By the way, on this tool, you can adjust the primer seating depth. That's kind of cool. You might want to check out the video we did on this quite a while ago. There we go. 5 cases primed and ready to load. I've already got it set up to throw that 40 grain charge, and I'm just going to go ahead. I found it consistent enough, although I could use the powder trickler to bring each one of them up perfectly. It really shoots just fine if I just dump the powder charges in each case. So that's where we're going with this. I actually like getting all of my powder charges done, and then I can do a visual check to make sure that I have one powder charge in each case, make sure it's there, and make sure they all are about the same height looking, so they all look the same. We've got good lighting in here. Otherwise, I would use something like a small flashlight or a headlamp to check down inside, but I can see these all have one powder charge, and they all look the same to me. We're going to move on to seating the bullet and crimping. So as you can see, this turret press is looking a little bit crowded right now. I've got a lot of dies up here on top. And the reason for that is I've got the 4570 dies, I've got the sizer, the flaring or belling die, I've got the cedar, and then I added a Lee factory crimp die. That's what I'm using on this project, but I've been loading a lot of 44 Magnum lately as well, and I'm just leaving my 44 Magnum dies on here. All I have to do is switch out the shell holder and swap over, adjust my powder measure, and instantly I'm loading pistol cartridges for the 44 Magnum again. It's kind of a nice feature of having the turret press, and one of the reasons I like to do a lot of loading on this particular machine. So I've got my cedar die, and you can crimp with the cedar die. I find that I usually get better results if I seat with one die and then use the Lee factory crimp die to put that crimp in there. Now, on a jacketed 4570 bullet or on a hard cast bullet that's got a real defined crimp groove in it, I would go ahead and put a pretty heavy roll crimp on those, especially if I'm going to the upper power levels, because I want to keep that bullet from moving either while the lever is being cycled and it's moving all those cartridges from the magazine on up into the chamber, or also the heavy recoil that the big 4570 loads can generate. Keeps it from jumping around on that too. Have to be a little more careful with the berries. That copper plating is tough, but it's not as tough as a conventional bullet jacket. So you want to go ahead and be careful you don't break it, and a little gentler roll crimp is the way to go on that. Got my shell in there, it's all primed, it's got the gunpowder in it. I'm going to go ahead and seat a bullet now. And you want to seat it right to that cannular. The Hornady die set is really nice. It's actually got a sliding sleeve that guides the bullet and the cartridge case up in there together. All right, so I come back down and then immediately swap it over there a little bit, and I'm going to my factory crimp die. Nice design. I just give that a little push, and I have a nice light roll crimp on my ammo. We'll do that again. When I first started loading 45-70 about 23 years ago, I was really struck with how similar this is to loading, say, a 44 Magnum or 45 Colt revolver round. Almost the same procedure. Very, very similar. So there we go. We've got 5 of them loaded and ready to go of the soft shooters. You may have seen this rifle, our Henry X model, in several other videos. It's fun to shoot. It's got packs a wallop. We can put a suppressor on it. We can put a light mount under it. We can put it on a bipod if for some reason you want your 45-70 on a bipod. We've got it set up with a real nice loopholed scope that has been just dandy. In fact, it's the same scope we use on our Shorty 308 rifle. We have another scope for that, but yeah, same model. It shoots well, and it handles any ammo that I've put together, any ammo we've come up with from the factories, cycles very nicely and shoots well. I got to admit, I kind of like this thing. Very utilitarian, and I'm more of a traditionalist when it comes to lever actions. I like the wood stocks and the blowing and all that, but this is a very utilitarian rifle, and I think it'd be a darn fine thing to have if I was out in the backcountry. So we used this as our test bed for these 3 different loads. And we started out with the trapdoor loads, the 40 grains of IMR 3031 and the 350 grain Barry's bullet. We got a very easy, mellow shooting load at 1,410 feet per second. That is not bad at all. And you think about that, that's still a 350 grain bullet at 1,400 feet per second. That's still reasonably powerful, okay? You're gonna be able to take deer or black bear, things like that with it, with a hunting bullet of that same weight. Not that the berries are going to bounce off, but they're intended as more of a target and practice bullet. Move it up a step. We move it up to the Lyman 1895 levels, and in that case we're at 1,753 feet per second. Noticeable difference in the way that the round sounded when it went off, noticeable difference in the way it felt in my shoulder. 1,753 feet per second with a 350 grain bullet is a pretty doggone serious load going downrange for modest range shooting that these rifles and this cartridge are really good at. Bumped it on up to the Hornady 1895 levels, 1,885 feet per second. I gotta tell you, this thing came back pretty darn hard and pretty darn fast in my shoulder. And we got some video of that too. So 1,885 feet per second. The bullet is rated to go up to 1,950 feet per second. I'm not sure I want to do that, okay? Because 1,885 feet per second was plenty. So when reloading, I like to know how my loads are performing, both downrange on target, on the animal, and I like to see what my velocity looks like. So we got the average velocities there. Also, we have our extreme spread and our SD, our standard deviation figures. Interesting to note that as we got up higher in that, this is a phenomenon that Gavin and I have seen in a lot of our loading. When you add a little bit of powder, you get to build the pressure up a little bit, things get more consistent, things get tighter. So as we went from the trapdoor level load with an extreme spread of 100, which is quite a bit, but the SD was only 32. Okay, for a plinking load, I'm okay with that. Then we pump it up to their Marlin 1895 level loads, and all of a sudden our extreme spread shrinks down to 25 feet per second. Whereas our SD was down to 11, almost down into single digit country, which when you're talking a 150-year-old cartridge in a lever action rifle, I think that's pretty darned impressive. Things get good when you pay attention to your loads and see what a little bit more gunpowder is going to do for you. So in conclusion, we had some fun at the range yesterday. We went out and we did our chrono data, and then we went out and just had some fun shooting at our industrial yard and shooting some steel out there. A lot of fun with the rifle. The rifle's accurate, dependable. The Barry's bullets were fine. I was making lots of good hits with them. And you know, it's funny when you're shooting a light, powerful rifle that's got some recoil. I have to admit that after doing the chronograph stuff and shooting the heavy max level loads, that I was ready to switch back down to the trapdoor level loads for our fun and industrial yard. Much easier to shoot, much nicer to handle, and for a plinking load, it's really hard to beat something loaded to that trapdoor level with an economical bullet, like maybe the Berry's 350 grainer. It worked well for me, and I'm glad I've got a big box here full of them to keep on using. This bullet is good for up to 1950 feet per second, which is pretty darned high for both the 45-70 and for a Berry's bullet. But it's rated for it, and we didn't have any trouble with any kind of excess fouling or anything at our 1885 feet per second. But that's 1885 feet per second was starting to make me notice, hey, I'm shooting something that kicks pretty hard. And so we went back down to the more economical practice trapdoor level loads for the fun shooting, and I highly recommend that. The Berry's bullets are a great alternative to either lead, which may or may not give you some leading problems in your barrel and your fouling problems, and also to the more expensive jacketed hunting bullets that are going to hurt your pocketbook more if you go to do a lot of practice with them. So what I want to know is, are you shooting a 45-70? And if so, are you shooting these Berry's 350 grain copper plated bullets, and what do you think of them? If you're not using the Berry's, what are you using for your practice loads from your 45-70? Drop a comment and we'll start a discussion. That's it for this video, and it's time to wrap it up.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, we're on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, where we've got unrestricted content, and Instagram. Make sure to follow us on all those channels. Ultimate Reloader also has a commercial solutions division serving law enforcement, the military, and the gun industry. We have some unique capabilities, including a comprehensive suite of recoil testing and evaluation capabilities, trigger profiling, and more. If you're interested in custom rifles like what we build here on the channel or gunsmithing services, you're going to want to go to rifles.ultimatereloader.com and get on the wait list. If you want to learn lucrative gunsmithing like what I show here on the channel, including building custom rifles and Cerakote plus a whole bunch more, you're going to want to check out the Colorado School of Trades, schooloftrades.edu. Thanks again for watching.